Dyslexia, so I knew they were great with that.
Right.
And they said, oh, sure, he could enroll tomorrow. And then the next day I got an email and they said, hey, does he have a 504 IEP? And I said, yeah, it's an IEP for dyslexia. And they're like, oh, we're not taking any of those kids.
Oh.
And I was so mad because I was like, wait a second, aren't you the district that just was in the news
Right.
about helping kids with dyslexia?
Welcome, Liz, to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, excited to have you on. I know we kind of last minute I texted you and you were kind enough to come on and be a part. And
Happy to.
And so I'm excited because you have a big background in education, and I'm excited to learn more because you've been a part of several nonprofits. You run a nonprofit. You're a executive director, I guess is your technical term, and we've known each other just through working through a few projects, but I don't think I know exactly all the background and expertise you have, and so I'm curious to learn more. And I guess where we'll start is around Arizona school choice and choose a school. That's where I'm kind of curious about. That's what you're doing currently. Am I right?
Yes.
So tell me a little bit more about those organizations. I've done a little looking into them, but I don't really know their premise, what they do, and I know they sure help a lot of people. So I'm curious to hear what your involvement is with that.
Well, those things are actually why I came to Arizona,
Wow,
in addition
okay.
to the sun. But Arizona has really led the way on school choice
Sure.
in the last 20 plus years.
Yeah.
It was the first state to have a tax credit program. The first charter school was started here. It has just a wide variety of school choice options. And in my previous jobs, I kind of worked all over the country on education issues and school choice. And so when I came to Arizona and I kind of saw where it was heading, I was really excited about what was available here to families. And that was before I even had kids of my own.
Okay.
And then I also came here, and after 3 days of being here, it was sunny each day. And I was like, oh my goodness, it's sunny here every day. I have to move here. So yeah, that's what brought me here was school choice. And
Where were you before, just out of curiosity?
so I'm from Michigan,
Okay.
but I lived in DC and worked for a couple organizations there, the Institute for Justice, and also did a lot of research and fundraising for school choice projects around the country.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And so you were from Michigan, went to DC, and was that like you were studying or getting an education in that field, or what led you to DC?
No, I actually graduated in 1999
Okay.
from Michigan State, a small school within Michigan State called James Madison College.
Okay,
So I
yeah.
studied political theory, things like that, and I got a job as a researcher at a think tank. And I read an article, I was filing, and as interns do, and sitting on the floor going through all these articles from around the country, and I read this article about a mom who had spent the night in jail because she used her sister's address to send her kiddo to a different school.
Really?
And I just thought, and it's since happened again. That same thing has happened since. And I just sat there thinking, like, how can this happen in a free country where
Right.
she's just trying to send her kiddo to a safe school and, it's not allowed. And so that was in Ohio. And the organization I was working for, the Mackinac Center, was doing a lot of research. They actually put out the first paper on tax credits before it even existed. And so I did a lot of research and article writing and things like that there. And through that job, I met some of the folks that worked in DC at the Institute for Justice.
Okay.
And that is a nonprofit law firm that kind of defends the little guy from government overreach.
Sure.
And they were the ones defending all of the school choice programs around the country, both in state Supreme Courts and in the U.S. Supreme Court. So that was really exciting to me. And I just happened to run into Clint Bullock, who helped found IJ at an event with a bunch of think tank and writers and researchers, and he said to me, "Did you just walk up to this person and introduce yourself?" And I said, "Yeah, should I not have?" And he said, "I think I might have a job for you." So, for me, it was like the Oscars, meeting all these people who had written books and articles and studies that I had read. I'm such a nerd. And, I moved to DC and worked for IJ, and I worked in almost every state that they worked in on school choice. I would go and meet with parents and, help figure out if they wanted to intervene on the cases. A lot of the cases defending school choice are like attorney generals, and there aren't any parents or the people who the cases will affect involved. So those people have to intervene on the cases to kind of have a voice. So it was a really, really interesting job, and I got to work with a lot of the state-based organizations, and that's really what I love. I feel like every state's different. There's really amazing people on the ground helping kids, and so that was also a draw to come to Arizona, because I really love the folks who are working here on these issues. So our organization now, we have a scholarship arm that provides scholarships if kids want to go to private school. But Choose a School, we help families find schools. We also help schools kind of navigate how to tell their story so that, when a family comes in the door, they're getting a real transparent picture of what a day in the life of a student is like.
Right, yeah.
Like, you can have a great building, a great marketing materials, but if you're not honest with parents about what you're offering, they might enroll and then not stay, and that's not good for the school or the kid.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
What's the dynamic of charter schools? Because I know charter schools kind of became a thing. I know Arizona was pretty big in maybe pioneering that.
Yes.
But I've lived in Arizona my whole life, so I've never experienced necessarily like the environment in Ohio where a parent got put in jail for something like an address change. So what's that like? Why would she have even been put in jail, and what's the differences, dynamics? What led to charter schools?
Well, like 30, 40 years ago, you just went to the school that was closest to your house.
Right.
And we still have a system like that, where you have an assigned school. That's a school that your child is, not just allowed to, but supposed to go to. And in states that don't have charter schools, private school choice, they really only have choice for people who can afford it. Okay. So if you can afford to move to a great school district, great.
Right.
If you can afford to pay tuition at a private school, you do have school choice. But if you can't afford to move to a higher quality school, or a school that has what your child needs, let's say your kiddo is into, arts, and the school you're at doesn't have a great art program. Maybe it's really heavy on science, or maybe they don't have, the resources for an awesome arts program.
Yeah.
You can't go somewhere else. Most states now have some form of inter-district choice, where you can maybe move to a different school within your district or outside of your district. But the caveat to that is that a lot of students that have, let's say, dyslexia or even an unseen learning need, they don't have to take them. They do have to take them if they're assigned to their school, but if they're transferring in as a choice student, they don't have to take them. So charter schools were a way to provide kind of an independent private school. So the school could be run by an independent board, an independent entity. Usually in most cases, it's a nonprofit and an independent board, and they're still required to follow all the same federal and state laws as public schools. They get public funding by student, but they don't get usually money for buildings, bonds, things like that. So they have to pay for their own facilities. But they have a little bit more latitude in the curriculum, in hiring, and things like that. So you could have, like, Arizona School for the Arts is a charter school. It's a really awesome performing arts school, and they have their own board, and they have their own curriculum, and parents who have kids that love the arts and performing, will drive an hour to get there every day.
Yeah.
So charter schools are public, and then in Arizona, you have tax credit programs and private school choice through the Empowerment Scholarship or Empowerment Savings Accounts. And that was the first program of its kind in the country. And it's truly where the family gets the money that their child would receive, or a percentage of it, that their child would receive in public school, and they can choose to use it for tuition. They can choose to homeschool as long as they provide, like, this is the curriculum. They can choose to use it for tutoring, things like that. They have to be educating the student, but they have freedom in how they use that money for their child. So I really think that's kind of the direction that education is taking, and I think down the road it will make things way more equitable for especially kids with learning needs.
Right.
Because right now, if you are a child with learning needs and your school will not acknowledge them, evaluate for them, or doesn't have the services that you need, you really don't have the same variety of options as like a neurotypical child has.
Right.
When I found out my son had dyslexia, I'm the school choice lady. Like,
Yeah.
I know all these options. I know how to get evaluated. I knew how to get him help outside the school we were in. And we were in a charter school that said, and they're not supposed to do this, but they said, hey, let's wait till third grade and let's see,
Sure.
if he's failing then, we might act. And by that point, you're so far behind.
Right.
So I actually applied for him at 4 different public schools. 2 had really great results and had received extra funding for dyslexia. So I knew they were great with that.
Right.
And they said, oh, sure, he could enroll tomorrow. And then the next day I got an email and they said, hey, does he have a 504 or IEP? And I said, yeah, he has an IEP for dyslexia. And they're like, oh, we're not taking any of those kids.
Oh.
And I was so mad because I was like, wait a second, aren't you the district that just was in the news about helping kids with dyslexia? But they don't have to take kids with disabilities if they're not assigned to that school.
Oh, why is that though? Is it like, what would be the motivation? Because I think for a school that you just want more students, right? Or
well, but with students with disabilities, in most states, not just Arizona, like if a child has a severe need, let's say they have autism, they receive somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000 a year, which helps the school cover, if they need one-on-one support in the classroom, if they need extra tutoring support or extra time on things. If a student has a specific learning disability like dyslexia, dysgraphia, they're not lesser disabilities. They don't impact them. They don't not impact them in the classroom, but the funding for that is really minuscule. Like some students will receive $100 or a couple $100 more than a typical student. That's not enough to even provide any support that they need.
I see.
So I understand, there's a huge discrepancy and it's not equitable how we fund, students with disabilities, especially given the fact that 20% or more of students sitting in every classroom right now have a learning disability.
Right. Wow.
They might not be diagnosed. That might not be known. You might just think the kid has a behavior issue. No, they can't keep up with the class or they have a processing delay. But 20% of all the kids sitting in classrooms right now have a learning disability or dyslexia, something like that. And the schools don't receive enough funding to provide the support that they need. So I started another project with my friend Carla. We've been talking about for almost 20 years, called the Arizona Inclusion Network. And so we are helping train schools how to identify, how to train teachers, how to make every classroom, not have, these removed classrooms for kids with disabilities, which is how it used to be, but we really believe that every school should be accessible to every student.
Sure.
And that the things that you do to improve outcomes for kids with disabilities help every student. Like providing more time on tests, or doing things verbally and visually at the same time.
Okay.
You don't know if you look at a class of 30 kids who are visual learners, who are auditory learners. So providing things in multiple modes usually helps all the students in the classroom
Right.
do better. Carla has a really great example of in preschool when her daughter was there. She really struggled with, dexterity, and so somebody recommended those triangle crayons,
Okay, yeah.
And so she bought them for the whole classroom, and sure enough, all the kids had an easier time doing what they were doing because they could learn how to hold it correctly, things
Yeah.
like that. So that's a really good example, and there's thousands of others where you can provide something that's an accommodation for maybe one student, but improves outcomes for everybody.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really because even kids who don't have necessarily a disability, they can still probably benefit from. I know me, for example, I'm very like a visual learner.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I wasn't ever tested, and I wouldn't necessarily say I have a learning disability per se, but having just a teacher teach more visually would have definitely been beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. So how does that inclusion network work? Is that just connecting with like all the schools to try and get them involved? Is that providing training? How do you guys do that?
Well, we're starting with private schools,
Yeah.
because, the charter schools and the public schools do have federal funding, state funding to service kids with disabilities. It's definitely not enough. Like, we all know that the funding formulas need to be fixed, and I think people on vastly different political sides could sit down and agree with
Totally.
that. But the Inclusion Network, we actually started by reaching out to kind of all the schools that we knew that were, really would love to accept more kids with disabilities or have, services or training for their teachers, and said, what do you need help with? And hey, can we get you all together? Because some of these schools are doing a really amazing job, or they've built training. Seton Catholic School, for instance, it's a high school, so it's 9-12.
Yeah.
It's college prep, so it's very rigorous. I would say they have one of the best programs for meeting the needs of every student. When I toured there as a parent, I never tell schools, like some of them know me through one of these roles, but if I tour as a parent, I never tell them what I do, because I want to get the real tour, as a parent, what they would tell students and parents. And when we toured there, within the first 5 minutes, the students doing the tour said, every kid comes into school a little behind in something. It might be math, it might be writing, they might struggle with science. We have this program called Sentinel Success to help students kind of keep up in the college prep model. And so every student that attends there does this Sentinel Success in 9th grade, and they learn things like executive function skills. They learn things that we're teaching people when they get to the corporate world,
Right.
When companies are saying, oh, our kids are so behind, they don't know time management, they don't know how to study, they don't know how to, format a document, things like that. So in Sentinel Success, they kind of cover a lot of those things that make high school or studying or college, the skills you need to be able to do that and be successful at it. And I've been so impressed with, how they don't see it as, oh gosh, we have to do it for these kids over here that have learning needs. They're like, everybody can benefit from this.
Right.
So that's kind of our dream with the Inclusion Network, is to find and help support amazing examples like that, where there's a school doing it really well. There's a school in North Phoenix that with every kid that comes in that has a learning need, they do a little profile of them. Like, here's what they're into, here's their interests, here's what they struggle with. They have these pets. And so every teacher that gets to know this child kind of knows how to engage them on things they're interested in so that they can find success and they can have some wins. And okay, if math is really hard, let's figure out how to build the math assignments around one of their interests. And so individualizing that educational experience isn't just positive for kids that have learning needs, it works for everybody.
Right.
And I think down the road, COVID was horrible and just created, kids are very behind from the time that they were at home or didn't have anything going on educationally, or schools were closed. But I do think it gave people a real kind of shock in how antiquated our methods are in meeting individual kids' needs.
Yeah.
Like online worked for some kids really well, and they're like, oh, maybe we should be doing this, maybe this would work for my kid. Or it didn't work at all for other kids, and they had really, really struggled mental health wise. And we realized that there are many ways we can individualize education to kind of meet the needs of kids better. And I think 5-10 years down the road, we're going to be doing a lot more of that, where they might be in the same school building, but we're saying, okay, they're really interested in robotics. Let's make that a bigger part of their schedule. Let's figure out how to integrate their math with that. Or let's let them take a college level class in something that they're really skilled at, so that they can be challenged and not just taking whatever the requirement is to graduate, you know?
Do you think since COVID, because that was such a big thing that impacted everybody, has the school system, the kids, do you think they've recovered from that incident, or do you think they're still feeling the repercussions of it?
No, the test scores that we're seeing are pretty abysmal coming out of the COVID years. And if you think of all the, this year is actually the highest number of college applicants in U.S. history.
Really?
So it's really interesting because there were a lot of kids that, graduated during COVID, or maybe they took a gap year because their college wasn't even open, or it was just a weird experience. So this year and next year will be the second highest number of college applicants. But the test scores are just showing that the kids have not recovered from COVID. And it makes sense. I mean, I had a friend whose kiddo was doing kindergarten online in a school that never used technology. So they're trying to get a kindergartner to use PowerPoint, which they've never used computers at school.
Right.
This is their first year of school, and they have to. I was trying to help her with a math assignment, and I'm like, if I can't do this, how is it? How are 30 kindergartners, doing this? And so it's just such a weird experience. And so I think we learned a lot from it, and I think a lot of high schools have gone and middle schools have gone to multiple modalities. You can go in-person traditional high school, or you can do a hybrid schedule where you go 3 days a week and you do online 2 days a week. And I think that works really well for a lot of kids that can't just sit in a desk 8 hours a day.
Right.
I mean, my youngest, there's just no way, he started kindergarten in a very traditional, classical school, and he hated kindergarten and he hated first grade, and it just was not a good model for him, and it also was really discouraging, you know. And when he got to a school where he could sit in different chairs, or they can sit on the floor, they can do group work, and he can do robotics and things like that. He gained more than 2 years of math and reading in 9 months at that school.
Really? Wow.
Because it was an environment where he felt capable and he could move around,
Right.
And so I think COVID, for all the horrible things that came with it, it really taught us the importance of having these unique models and have it be available to every kid, not just
Totally.
kids who can afford it. You know, that they
Mm-hmm.
should be able to go to a school and environment and have an individualized education that works for them.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a good thing long term, but I think we're still recovering from kind of the academic fallout
Yeah.
from what kids missed,
Totally.
you know.
No, that totally makes sense. I mean, I I just think of like my experience in school too, and I mean it's hard when you put a kid in a chair for 8 hours and give them a 30-minute recess and hope that that was enough time to get the jitters out. And I mean it's just hard to, if you're not in an environment where your brain's set to learn, it's like how can you expect them to really pick up
I mean,
things?
can you
And
imagine either one of us and all the people that you and I work with in a daily, can you imagine any of us sitting for 8 straight hours doing the same
No.
thing? No, I think we'd go crazy and be super unproductive.
Totally. Yeah, no,
So.
I mean, just even at work, everyone's always, taking a little break or moving. Yeah, I mean, it's just,
Or sitting in a different location, or like you might be listening to music while you're, working on a PowerPoint or something like that.
Yeah. yeah, no, having that ability to, I mean, your brain needs breaks, right? And you need to be able to get in the right environment to really absorb what you're trying to do. So that's really interesting. That is cool that COVID kind of had some benefits of breaking down some of the cookie cutter methods that
Yeah.
were maybe in the school system. What would you say, because you really are kind of boots on the ground experiencing it with the schools, and obviously you have your kids in school as well, so you get it from the parent side and kind of the, I don't know if administrator side, but a little bit of that side as well. What would you say is the biggest challenge? 'Cause I think there's lots of good organizations trying to do good, and I think for the most part most schools and educators and administrators want to help the kids they're teaching. I think that's probably the overarching
Yeah.
goal. But what would you say is like the biggest slowdown or hang up or area where things get stuck, or just what's the biggest mountain to climb when it comes to helping, I don't know if education reform, but just helping make schools a better environment? What's the biggest hurdle?
Well, I think it's interesting because there's a lot of opposition to school choice, and then there's a lot of opposition to only having one model, like the
Yeah.
public school model. And a lot of times those people don't talk to each other
Right.
because they're like, well, I don't like what your position on it is, and I don't like what your position on it. But most of the writers that talk about kids and success, whether it's little kids or teenagers, Ned Johnson is one of my favorite writers. Um, you know, no kid wants to do bad.
Right,
No
right.
kid wants to fail in school or do poorly. They just, do they have the right tools to be successful in the environment they're in?
Sure.
And I feel that way about the adults too. Like, nobody gets into public education or teaching in any type of school like for the money or for the prestige.
Sure.
Like, it's a really hard job. I could not be a fifth grade classroom teacher. I mean, I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
What they do and being able to meet the needs of 30 different kids in their classroom, I think one of the biggest barriers is that, just like everything else in kind of American life, the people who are all have the same vision and mission of like meeting the needs of kids,
Sure.
like can't sit down at the table together and say, hey, we all want these kids to do well. How can we make that happen
Right.
together? Or, I really had a kind of, I don't know if I would call it an epiphany, but the experience of going through finding a school with my own kids. And I have two kids with disabilities, and they're both really smart kids who
Yeah.
weren't engaged and were treated really badly at their school because of their disabilities.
Yeah.
And that was really kind of a shock to me because I thought, wow, I didn't work 20 years of my life on school choice to then have it used as kind of a weapon
Right.
against my kids. Okay, well, we'll take care of these kids, but
Right.
if you don't fit into this little box, then we're not going to. And I see that happen across the board. I
Yeah.
mean, the school that had the best dyslexia program wouldn't take my son, you
Right,
know?
right.
And so I think our biggest barrier is that we have to accept that there isn't going to be one perfect model. And if I had a good friend, I finally got to have lunch with her yesterday. She runs this really awesome program called Scribble to Script. You should have her on your show sometime.
Yeah.
It is a revolutionary program that helped both of my kids. It started out as a writing therapy center, but it really helps kids with a lot of different things now. But, you know, she said she had someone tell her, like, don't start with what you think things should look like in the perfect world. Like, you have to start with what is.
Right. Yeah.
And I think we as people and humans, especially in the U.S., we never acknowledge what is. And what
True.
is that the kids are struggling. The funding is not equitable, especially when we know the number of kids that actually have disabilities in our classrooms. We all could agree on that. And what isn't working for every kid. So if we
Yeah.
start with that, then what can we do together to figure out how to meet their needs better?
Right.
And so I have seen some progress on this front. You know, some of the folks that I know, I've had some really good discussions with a lot of friends that just vehemently oppose school choice and have criticisms that are fair, you know. And then we've had
Sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
What would those? Because you mentioned some of the issues with school choice, and I'm just like, I'm curious, like what would those even be? Because I don't even know what those would be.
So the biggest argument against school choice is that people say it defunds the public school. So let's say I don't send my kiddo to the school they're assigned to, so therefore that school doesn't get his or her money.
Oh.
In the aggregate, yes, they don't get that money. However, they're also not educating that kid.
True.
And the ESA programs, the charter school programs in Arizona especially, charter schools get thousands less per student.
Yeah.
Like they get an allocation from the state for that student being in the seat, but they don't get any of the facilities funding. They have to fund their own buildings. I've done the numbers with a number of charter schools and networks, and so they usually can educate the child for a lot less than the traditional public school. But they're paying more for like the logistical things.
Right.
One of the other arguments, so I believe two things can be true at the same time.
Sure.
Is that public school not getting the money for that kid that's going to another option? True. But they're also not educating that student. And like
Sure.
the ESA program, does it cost the state money? Yes. However, that student is usually using a fraction of or less than they would have been using in the public school.
I see.
So that is one argument that I think probably the two sides will never agree on.
Sure.
One of the reasons we started the Inclusion Network was because one of the myths of school choice is that private schools don't take kids with special needs. It's not a myth. It's true in a lot of cases. A lot of private schools, especially religious schools, like they have a heart to take kids that have disabilities, but they need the training and the tools and the things to do that. Well, public schools and charter schools have access to federal funds, to resources, and they're required to do it. Do they all do it? No, but they have resources
Right.
to provide for those services. A lot of the private schools will tell parents when they tour, like, I know your child has dyslexia. We don't have a reading specialist full time, but we could bring somebody in or something
Sure.
like that. So I think that is not a myth. It is true, but it's also true on the public side too, that not every school meets those needs or even accepts the kids
Right.
because of their disabilities. So those are two really good examples of like there is some common ground to be found.
Yeah.
Like everyone could agree if we have this huge percentage of kids with disabilities, the funding formulas need to be fixed.
Right.
And people who don't even talk on most issues could sit down at a table and say, okay, how do we fix this? If we could fix this in Arizona, could it be fixed elsewhere?
Right.
Especially as we're having all these discussions on like, is grant funding going to come to the states? Things like that as federal stuff gets is changed, and we don't know how that's all going to shake out. So, and then I think that there is a lot more common ground than people are willing to discuss.
Totally.
You know, because it becomes very, you know, well, if we support this, then we're not supporting that, and I don't think that's true anymore.
Yeah.
We have, if you go to any corporation, Intel, Google, you know, any manufacturing corporation in the United States, and you say, how's it going with hiring? First of all, they're going to be like, there's not enough people.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, the people we're getting are just not coming out of high school and college with the skills that we need.
Totally. Yeah.
And so I think there is a lot of common ground among all of the key stakeholders that say we need to figure this out. And the more that we individualize education, the more that we meet kids where they're at, where it really is, and not where we think it should be, not this perfect system that doesn't exist.
Totally.
The better the outcomes are going to be for everybody involved.
Yeah.
That sounds great. It's very hard to do, and to get all of those people, you know, to a table to talk about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you'd think, especially with education and the fact that it's like, you know, people's kids and young adults, that it would be such a bipartisan, like people would just go, oh, we just need to help and we need to find a solution. But I guess that's true. There is a lot of times people want the solution to be one system, simple, clean, everyone fits into that box, but it's like, that's just not people. People don't necessarily fit one system. They have to have it be, as you put it, specialized towards their needs, specialized to what's going to work best for them. Mm-hmm. But I'm interested. I don't know if I've always wondered, because I've heard that as well with lots of these big corporations that are trying to hire, going, then it's just like they're ill prepared for the workforce, for life outside of once they graduate. Do businesses try to get involved? Do they try to put money towards the education system, or is that kind of a approach that business in that world doesn't even want to get involved in? Or
I think for a long time it didn't. There wasn't even like a mechanism to do that. There were industries like, you know, building and contracting, where they would provide schools or apprenticeship programs, things like that, to try to, the kids that weren't going to go to college but wanted to go into a skilled trade. You know, when I was a kid, my dad ran a construction business, and I remember going to like an annual dinner with him, and we were sitting there, and I had just graduated college. I was like, oh, I got my first job. I was so excited. And, you know, I was working at this think tank, and I remember him leaning over and whispering to me, and all these people had come from work, and they were electricians or working on these big commercial jobs, and he whispered to me, and he's like, how much do you think these guys make? And I said, I don't know. And I said, I don't know. Like, at the time, it was like the 90s, you know, early 2000s. I'm like, I don't know, $19,000, $20,000 a year. And he's like, double that. And I'm like, Dad, why didn't you tell me to be an electrician, you know? And he's like, well, I didn't want any of these guys hitting on you or something. He said something funny like that. But the skilled trades have been very, very underrepresented, underutilized. There are so many kids that love technology and love working with their hands, and like they're sitting in English and like history classes for 4 years, with no access to, you know, learning a trade that they could go not just make a career out of, but like have their own business.
Right.
And it's just, this is an issue that like my husband and my dad have talked about for years. Like, how do we help make that a reality? And I think that is becoming, there's a really neat conference actually that was set up years and years ago by ASU. It's called the ASU GSV conference. And it brings together kind of education people from the education space, universities, schools, companies that do education technology. And then all of these companies, like in the technology space, in the, all different industries, to talk about that very subject. Like, what are we doing and how do we build a better skilled workforce, and how do we work backwards into the universities and into the schools to build competency instead of just like passing kids along with grades. And ASU is actually kind of leading the way on mastery-based, they've started mastery-based transcripts for some of their programs. They have a new program coming out called the Levitt Lab, which I'm super excited about. It is a high school within ASU that kids can graduate from. They can take at least two to four courses a year, and come out of high school with like 40 credits.
Really?
And they can take the college level classes. If they don't want to be in a class like with the college students, they can do it online.
Yeah.
But they are coming to school 4 days a week. They have a coach and a mentor instead of like a teacher that's kind of guiding them through, okay, these are the classes you want to take. They allow them to do like deep dives, and if they're really into like science, they can take like 200 level classes. If they're really into art, they can take, painting and textiles or something, So it's a really neat model, and I think that is kind of the future of high school and college, is building competencies and mastery instead of just grades. Kids coming out of high school with skill sets that they can literally go use even while they're in college. They could have a job or be trying out the field that they want. They don't have to wait 4 to 6 more years to do something in the arena that they're excited about. So I think ASU is really onto something with Levitt Lab. I think it was so funny when my daughter and I went to an info session. They had a little 5-minute video from Steve Levitt, and we just giggled through the whole thing because it's everything she says about like school and high school and the way the education system is. Like, I can't spend hours learning about creative writing, and that's what I want to do for a living. Like, I have to take all these classes that just like check a box. And so I think I hope that ASU will help other universities do that, because that is, I think, a way to speed up this individualized idea of meeting kids where they're at and what they're interested in. There's a good friend of mine who's also a kind of public speaker for Fortune 500 companies. He used to be a mime and like an actor on cruise ships. And then he turned his kind of performance into a book about kind of performance level living. And he had a lot of learning needs as a kid. And he tells this story about how when he was a kid, every special needs kid, like, you go to the classroom down the hall that is like 4 kids and it's a little closet. And he had this teacher that sat down with him the day he visited the school and said, what are you interested in? Could tell he was like scared. And he said, oh, I just love mimes and acting and like clowns and like all this stuff. And the first day of school, he showed up. At his desk was like a pile of books about mimes and, acting and drama and all of this stuff. And even though he struggled with reading and all of those things, like, here's somebody that took an interest in something he was interested in, and that changed the entire course of his life, you know? And so just being able to get kids excited about what they're interested in and give them access to those things, I think is incredibly powerful. So I think if we can figure out and get businesses invested in, like, I'm excited to see that a lot of businesses are hiring kids or hiring adults that have autism or that have, learning needs because they're creative thinkers, because
Right.
they think outside the box. If you look at all the people who have invented things in the history of the universe, most of them were neurodivergent.
Sure.
We just didn't know it at the time, you
Right.
know? So I think we've come a long way in the last 5 to 10 years and kind of understanding that everybody has a skill set and a set of interests. And if you can really like tap into that potential, like they can do amazing things you never imagined. But if you just try to have them check off boxes or kind of go through kind of the motions, like they're never going to find that potential.
Right.
Yeah.
No, totally. I mean, if you're mentally wired that you're like, man, I just love technology and science, and you're sticking them in front of a English writing paper for their entire high school experience,
Yeah.
they're gonna go, okay, I hate school. I'm not doing this anymore. And they've never really facilitated or explored that interest they had, so that's really neat. I think too with the college system and high school, it's kind of gotten stagnant, and so the fact that they're finding a way to kind of incorporate them together and specialize
Yeah.
it. Because I know for me, even looking at college, sometimes I was looking at it going, why am I taking 4 math classes and a this and a that when I just want to study this and I want to go
Right.
pursue this, part of my life and explore this. And there's something to be said about some foundational pieces, but, it's like if they want to study that, they have an interest in that, why not go and explore that with them?
Right.
So that's really interesting that what they're doing there.
And think of how many people, I was in the honors college at Michigan State, and I can't tell you how many 6, 7 year students were in my dorm when I started as a freshman, and I'm like, it took them years to figure out what they were interested in majoring in,
Right.
because they'd never had that opportunity in high school to
Yeah.
try things out or do a deep dive on something that they thought, wow, this is really cool. Or take a college level class. I think that's just crazy.
Right.
That you have to be in your 3rd or 4th year in college or an honors student or a graduate student to take a 300 level or an advanced level class in something you're interested in. Even if
Right.
it's hard, even if you did really badly in it, at least you'd find out if it's something that you
Right.
are passionate about,
Right.
I thought I wanted to study journalism when I went into college, and I'm so glad I applied for James Madison, and I took one journalism class, and I'm like, this is so boring. I
Yeah.
cannot make a 4-year degree out of this. I want to learn something I'm interested in, and then I can go write about it,
Yeah.
And so I was so grateful that, I was able to try out some classes that were higher level classes and see if that's what I wanted to do, so it didn't take me 7 years to figure it out,
Totally. Yeah, I've got so many friends who, they've been in college a few years, and every time I go to visit, every semester, I'm like, oh, how's it going? They're like, well, I switched my major again
for the 4th time.
for the
Yeah.
4th time. Yeah, and I was in this class for a few weeks. I'm dropping it, and I'm gonna switch over to this, and you ask yourself, you're like, man, one, that's a tough place to be trying to figure out what you want to do
And
find your interest.
expensive.
And expensive.
Yeah.
And you're right, if they don't really have anything prior to college that is an experience that's difficult, challenging, figuring it out, they're probably pretty ill prepared to even succeed in that environment, because it can be tough and challenging and a lot of work and load. And so I've seen a lot of friends where that becomes a long struggle process of them trying to go, okay, do I like this? Do I not
Right.
like this? And I think there's not a lot of application either. Sometimes, you get into a class and it's like, well, I'm hearing a lot of ideas about this, but I'm not really doing anything.
Right.
You know,
I've
I'm
never
not-
tried it.
Right. So it's I don't even know if I get out there and apply this skill, if I'll like it. And so I had a friend who, I think he did 4 years of medical type schooling, and finished and was about to go into kind of the next level to get his, I don't know exactly what it would be called, but get more into the medical degree. And he was like, I'm not doing this. I have no desire. And so he quit. Now he's doing he's going into being a pilot.
Oh
And,
my goodness.
so it's like completely different.
Right.
And we
But probably never got to try out being a pilot or learning about it,
Right.
until he was an adult.
Mm-hmm. And now, I think he's like, oh, I like it. I chose it because the lifestyle seemed appealing, and he's like, it fits my desire. But part of it too is I think now he's spent quite a bit of money into it, and it's like, well, I've kind of chosen what I'm gonna do now, so
Yeah.
better like it. But luckily I think he's really enjoying it. But it's yeah, it's a crazy system if you don't have any foundational blocks to guide you in a direction.
I'll
going
never
on.
forget, when you're in high school, they have like a end of the year wrap up where they give
Yeah.
awards to students, and it's like a lunch or dinner or something
Yeah.
with parents. And I'll never forget, there were two kids in my high school that everybody was just like, oh, they're not going to go to college or whatever, and acted like it was a bad thing. And one kiddo got a small but significant scholarship to go to a like an auto mechanic training school.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember years later following up with like kids in high school, went to a wedding or something.
Yeah.
And both of those kids like went on to not only like learn their trade, but like own their own business. And the fact that people were so discouraging about like, oh, you don't want to go to college, like then you're not a good student, like, and that they couldn't work on those things or learn those things while they were in high school to kind of get ahead and get an edge, and be
Right.
years ahead when they did graduate from high school and doing what they wanted to do or starting their own business. Like, it was really heartbreaking to me, because I'm like, here's somebody that has this amazing skill that other people can't do,
Yeah.
that's needed in the economy, that's needed out in the world, and they've got to wait like 5 more years to even
Right.
begin to learn it. And then they could be, going straight out of high school and like running their own business and be successful and be doing the job every day that they want to do. Like,
Yeah.
who doesn't want that for people? Like, we're investing hundreds of thousands of dollars if a kid wants to go into the medical field, or and we praise them for that. Oh, we're so excited you want to become whatever, a physician's assistant, like, good for you. But we need people who do all of this type of work, and we should encourage kids who want to learn a trade or want to learn a skill and own a business. Like, that is just as admirable as going to college and getting a degree and going into law or some
Yeah.
other career. And so I really hope that dynamic, that seems like a dynamic that has been decades in changing. And I
Right.
do think we're getting somewhere on it now, but it's crazy to me that discussion was happening when I was in like elementary and high school. Like, how do we support students that want to go into the trades? And now we're having the same discussion now.
Right.
Like, it shouldn't be a negative. It should be, especially as we talk about like, how does the U.S. compete with other countries?
Right.
And be able to hire people who are here in the U.S. and coming out of our colleges. Like, we can't do that if we don't support people learning all of these things.
Totally.
And maybe they don't want to go to college. Maybe they want to learn a trade and start working. I couldn't wait to get out of college. Like, I loved learning and I loved college classes, but I couldn't wait to like have a real job every day where I
Yeah.
did what I was working towards,
Yeah.
So I actually worked full time while I was in my last like 2 years of college, because I just couldn't wait to be doing what I wanted to be doing. And I think there's a lot of kids that feel that way, and we should encourage that way sooner.
Right.
I have one of my friend's kiddos actually is in high school, just getting their driver's license, and just took their first, funny you brought that up, their first flight, like flying a plane,
Yeah.
I think a week ago or last weekend. And I'm just so excited for them. And
Yeah.
I'm like, this is how it should be. Like, you should be able to try these things out and learn or shadow somebody, and you shouldn't have to be in your like second to last year of college to do
Right.
that.
Right. No, totally. Yeah, it's you got to let people explore their path, because at the end of the day it's like I would think the goal is like we want to have as many productive, happy, successful individuals doing meaningful work as possible. You know, we like, yes, it's good to have a lot of doctors, a lot of lawyers, and a lot of those type of positions, but you know, and I think now we're kind of seeing it too, because it seems to be a little bit of a skills trade-off. You mentioned, you know, a lot of these, like, for a long time, no one wanted to be a plumber, no one wanted to be an electrician, no one wanted to be, you know, XYZ, and now it's like we don't have enough.
Right.
And it's like we need more of those things, and so I think
Or maybe they wanted to be, but they were discouraged from it. Or maybe they were good at it, but they were like, oh, that's not a good job.
Right.
And then you find out that, like, somebody who runs their own plumbing contracting company or even works for one is probably making more than what they would have made coming out of college, you know? Like, when I looked at what most of my friends coming out of college for the first couple of years were making compared to somebody that got a 1-year apprenticeship and then went into a trade and was already 4 years into their career, like, it was a little bit astonishing. And they had no school debt, you know?
No, totally. Yeah, they put themselves kind of in a good position to succeed because they picked something and went with it.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the path of experience being a really good teacher is not often promoted. It's kind of like, no, there's other methods, go down this method, but like you said, you were like, I want to get in and actually start working and applying what I'm learning, because that's where I'm gonna start to really experience the things I'm doing. So yeah, I don't think that's overly promoted, but I think it's starting to be more promoted, it seems like.
I was so, you know, working in education all these decades, I was so, like, focused on academics and, you know, how do I get my kid into a school that's good with academics, and I want it to be challenging and all of this. And when I look back, my oldest is 16 and wants to be a writer, wants to write fantasy novels.
Oh, cool.
She's an amazing writer, and I'm not just saying that as her mom. I'm an avid reader, and she's really good at it. And the most life-changing thing that we did had nothing to do with school.
Really?
We went, she got interested in this show called The Dragon Prince. And it's a really funny show where the main character is autistic. Like, they don't say that, but it's based on one of the writer's family members, and it's just, the characters are so amazing, so loving. It's very funny. So we flew all the way to New York City to go to just their panel for the Dragon Prince at Comic-Con. Never been to a Comic-Con, never thought I'd go to a Comic-Con. And I emailed one of the writers. I just kind of guessed emails till I found it. And I said, I don't know, like, my kid hates crowds. She doesn't like loud things. Like, I've never been to a Comic-Con. Like, am I flying all the way there to maybe not even see this panel? And they were so gracious and emailed me back and said, here's some advice, and like, no, you know, here's how you can get into the panel. You don't have to wait in line. You can get a, you know, pass and whatever.
Yeah.
So long story short, they reached out and they said there was going to be a fan meetup, and I was like, oh, that's cool. She would love that, you know? And so, like, 10 o'clock at night, I said, hey, you know, we're here. Is there a fan meetup? And they said, oh, do you want to have breakfast tomorrow? So I thought it was a fan meetup, like just everybody that was in town. They literally took my daughter to breakfast and told her, like, just us, and told her, like, how they got into it, why they wrote the script around, you know, people they had known, and how much it meant to them that there were diverse characters that, you know, maybe were neurodiverse and thought differently and creatively. And told her how they write scripts for shows and how it differs from writing books and things like that. And that, like, 2 hours of her life was, like, so impactful to say, hey, there are tens of thousands of people just like me that have creative brains, that think differently, that think different ways, and that are literally making a life out of writing and creating. And I could do this too. And so those experiences are really important for kids to have. Like, whether they're little kids or older kids or college students, like, they need to have access to kind of meeting people who are doing what they're interested in, or maybe they meet them and they shadow them and they're like, I do not want to do this, you know, like this is not for me.
Right.
Especially if you're going into like medical field or something like that, like you need to know what you're getting yourself into.
Totally.
But I just think that experience was so impacted me to try to find ways to give kids access to those types of experiences, and that more unique, tailored experience in their education, because they need to know that there's people out there like them doing the things that they imagine themselves doing. And if they don't have access to that until they're, you know, older adults, they might have already picked a path that wasn't what's best for them, or what would, you know, set their soul on fire. So that was very, very kind of humbling for me to have that experience, because I thought, gosh, I've invested all this time and energy worrying about academics and what the school building looks like, or, you know, extracurriculars, like all the things you worry about as a parent, and then just plugging my kid into somebody else that's doing what they are passionate about doing, like, can change the course of history, you know? So I think that's important to think about, like, whether you're a preschool teacher or a college professor, like, how do we get these kids, you know, just really excited about what they're already excited about, you know? Even if it's Minecraft or, you know, taking things apart, like, how do you get them excited about it, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think people have to let kids explore and be curious and try things earlier before they get into a time in their life where it's like, I just got to pick something and, you know.
Right, or I've just got to go get a job to
make some
money.
Yeah, let them explore, let them be curious, and let them find their path. I 100% agree. I think that would make people's education experience, at the very least, like 10 times better.
Yeah.
So, well, Liz, this has been a blast. I've learned so much from you. This is, like I said, I kind of knew little bits and pieces of your background, but I didn't know to what extent and what level you were involved in. And it sounds like you're doing amazing work and helping
Thank you.
many. So, where can people learn more about these programs, what you offer, and what you do?
Well, we have a Facebook page for Choose a School, so we post information there, like on unique schools that are coming out. And then the Arizona School Choice Trust has a website too, if you're interested in scholarships, things like that.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, Liz, I know we kind of just even scratched the surface about this. There's probably so much more we could learn and discuss, and you probably have countless stories and experiences to share. But we'll wrap it up for today. And
Thank you.
We'll have to have you on another time.
I would love that. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Liz. Thanks, everybody.